You're listening to Dakota Spotlight. My name is James Woolner. I hope you're all doing well out there in podcast land. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, many of us can feel spring slowly but surely taking hold. Meanwhile, if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, I imagine you listening as autumn is just starting to settle in. No matter where you are on this crazy planet, thank you so much for listening. This week, while I am busy working on the next stellar series of the show, we're revisiting an interview I did with a remarkable young man seeking justice for the murder of his kid brother. Eric Carter-Landin is the host and producer of the podcast True Consequences. I caught up with Eric one day in 2021 and learned about his passionate quest for justice. I know you're going to enjoy it. So let's step aside and give the floor to Eric Carter-Landin. Here is our conversation. Eric Carter-Landin, thank you so much for joining me on Dakota Spotlight podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on, James. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your show. First of all, it's called True Consequences. And while I'm occupying the area of the upper Midwest, you are where?
I'm covering crime in New Mexico, which is my home state. It's where I live. It's where I was born and raised, and I'm very passionate about issues of justice and issues of legislation related to justice here in New Mexico. So True Consequences is all about that. It's about creating a platform for myself, for my family, but also for those other individuals in this state that are seeking justice for their loved ones.
How long have you been doing this?
In October, it'll be 2 years.
What got you started, or why did you decide to start on your podcast?
Well, 34 years ago, my baby brother was murdered, and his killer was never brought to justice. And as I grew up, I started to see things happening in New Mexico that were cases that were very similar to his, which was disturbing to say the least. And I kept saying to myself that somebody should do something about this. Somebody should say something about this epidemic that's happening here in relation to child abuse. And nobody ever did. And as time went on, I started to get interested in podcasts, and I even tried a hand at a few other podcasts related to child abuse and other things that never really took off or never really did very much. So put those away and still continued to be a listener for a while. And then one day it just hit me like I could do this. I could record a podcast and make it hyper local, which was something that I felt was at the time pretty new. It's starting to become more and more popular to do that. I think there was only a handful of highly localized true crime podcasts when I came on board, and now they're everywhere, which is awesome and exciting to see that. I saw the potential to really make an impact with a true crime podcast because it's at that level. The national podcasts, of course, they can get some momentum going, but the response that I've received here locally has been phenomenal. I mean, the district attorney and the attorney general's offices listen to my podcast, which is scary and exciting at the same time.
Do you have a so-called day job, or what's your career look like?
Yeah, I'm basically what you would consider to be like a regional manager. Ideally, I'd like to get to the point where my nonprofit, which I started recently, hopefully could become my full-time job. This podcast will roll into that. So that's my ultimate goal. But until then, I have to pay the bills. So I have to work.
That was going to be one of my questions about your nonprofit. How hard is that to get up, and what have you learning along the way?
It's not very easy. I think there's a lot of steps involved and a lot of paperwork, as you can imagine. And that takes time. And, I applied for the incorporation through the state of New Mexico in, I think it was February, and I just got it back at the beginning of June. So it took quite a while for that to get processed, and now I have to file with the IRS, and I don't even have any idea how long that's going to take, but I imagine it's going to be a very long time before I get my 501(c)(3) status. So it's a lot of work, and it's going to take a while. And then we have the problem of finding funding after that. So, it's a very daunting task, but I'm probably one of the most persistent people ever. And so I'm not going to give up on it for sure.
Can you tell us a little more about your background growing up? Just interests and things like that?
Sure. Well, like I said, I had a pretty traumatic childhood, and that created I don't know if we call it a healthy obsession, some kind of obsession with escapism. So you would often find me in the library for hours on end reading tons of books, probably books I should not have been reading. A lot of trash novels, kind of my go-to for escapism. Dean Koontz, Stephen King, like those kinds of trashy novels that really nobody has any business reading, but I enjoyed them. And then I also found myself getting into weird things like the Bermuda Triangle and UFOs and Loch Ness Monster and just anything that was strange and bizarre. And then naturally started gravitating towards mafia bosses and crime and that kind of stuff too. So those things have always been, I think it helps with people who have high anxiety to expose themselves to this kind of stuff so that you can be prepared for any potential eventuality in your life. If I'm going to get abducted by aliens, I'm ready for it. So
that's awesome.
So, growing up, that was my life. And I lived in a very small town. I think there was probably, it was at its best 10,000 people. Today it's like 6. So
there's this whole spectrum of true crime podcasts, some better than others, some more ethical than others. What are your thoughts on ethics?
With regards to ethics, I have a lot to say about this. It is something that is extremely important to me as a content producer. I think that the quality of a show is so important, but the ethics are also very important. And what I mean by that is, I think people need to remember that we're talking about the worst day in somebody's life. This is not a movie. It's not a book. It's not fiction. It's reality. And that needs to be top of mind when creating content related to crime. And I think that intent goes a very long way with regards to ethics and true crime. Not everybody's going to be perfect. I'm not going to be perfect. I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm going to say something that's wrong, but it's what you do when that happens. Are you willing to learn? Are you willing to change your behavior, change your mindset to be better? And I hope that more creators start going down that road, because a lot of them will get defensive when they get called out on things like that. One example is there was you might have seen this, I don't know if you're on Twitter, but there was a victim who was begging a creator to take down a 911 call that he had made when his family member had passed away, had been murdered, because he was a minor, and it was traumatizing for him to hear that. And the creator refused. And then whenever the heat was on enough on that creator, he said, well, fine, but I'm going to take everything off the whole episode. You're not going to get justice for your family member now because you're asking for this. And I just feel like that's wrong.
Yeah, thanks for providing an example, because as you were talking about this, it struck me that some people don't even know what we're talking about. Ethics is such a broad word, right? But I don't know. I think, where is that fine line? Well, sometimes it's a fine line. I've made mistakes, but I still stand by my work for the most part. A couple mistakes here and there.
Sure. Well, I think the line is sensationalism. I think that's the line. The other line is romanticization and fetishization of murderers and serial killers.
Sure.
That's another line that really is disgusting, in my opinion, and wrong. Honestly, I think that true crime should be victim focused, and it should be provided through the lens of empathy. And telling the story for the story's sake is okay, but really, I think that we need to move past that and move into the place where we're starting to help those family members that are left behind, that are forgotten, that are left holding the bag. Because that pain, the pain of being ignored and gaslit by authorities and not being heard and feeling like you're screaming into the vacuum is the worst pain imaginable. It's almost worse than losing your loved one.
Let's move into the story of your brother because you know firsthand what this pain feels like. Please share with us as much as you feel like sharing of your journey and what you've gone through, and I guess whatever you feel like sharing. I know it's a tough topic.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. So my brother was 9 months old when he was murdered, and it's very clear that it was my mom's boyfriend at the time. My mom has asked me not to call him our stepfather because she feels that he doesn't deserve that title. And I'm inclined to agree with her. I'm inclined to agree with her on that. But the story is pretty long and involved. And if you want, a lot of detail, you can definitely listen to the 3 episodes on my show, starting with the one where I interviewed my mom. But this man kind of swooped into our lives in a moment of vulnerability for my mother and I. My mom had just separated from my dad. We were moving back from Texas to New Mexico to be close to family, and he stepped in and started love bombing us, basically. Which for people who don't know what that is, it's basically showering your victim or intended victim with affection and attention and gifts. It's a form of disarming that, if you're in a vulnerable state, is very difficult to see as threatening and dangerous, especially in the 80s when we didn't have information about behavior like this. There wasn't a word for it. So that's what happened. And what happens is your mind starts to create this ideal version of this person. And it's normal for people to fall in love with these people, with these predators, when they're behaving this way, because my mom was so starved for attention, and I was so starved for attention, that when this happened, it was like, wow, this is what it's supposed to be like. Like, it's like the movies, right? It feels great. And it was great until it wasn't. And things started happening to my brother. He started to have injuries that were unexplainable. And a lot of things happened in between, but essentially, I had been sent to live with my father, and the only person that was with this man was my brother, after weeks of not being left alone with him because of circumstances. And within, I would say, less than an hour, maybe 40 minutes, my brother was unconscious and being airlifted to a trauma center, and he died that evening. And what happened after was pretty intense and pretty horrific. I always tell people that my life could have been one of those made-for-TV movies that you used to watch in the 80s and 90s, the super dramatic. That's what it felt like looking back at it. My mom didn't really know that her then boyfriend was responsible for Jacob's death. He claimed that it was an accident, and she believed him.
We will be right back with Eric Carter-Landin, host and producer of the podcast True Consequences. We're talking about the murder of Eric's younger brother, Jacob. We are back with Eric Carter-Landin, producer of the podcast True Consequences. Check him out anywhere you get your podcasts or at trueconsequences.com.
He claimed that it was an accident, and she believed him. And there's a lot of reasons why she believed him. Probably the biggest reason was that we knew this man our entire lives. He was not a stranger to us. He was my father's best friend. His family and my family were very connected. His dad was a preacher at a church that my family went to. His sister was married to my mom's brother. His aunt is my godmother. So we felt like we knew this person, and it didn't seem likely, and anybody who knows this person would agree, that this is not the type of thing that you would expect from him, because he does present this persona in public of somebody gregarious and kind and loving and caring and empathetic, but none of that is real. That's all a show. So their relationship continued, and another reason that she believed him was because he had been given a polygraph exam. And while we know that those are not very reliable now, in the 80s, those were kind of the end-all be-all. Like, if you passed the polygraph, you were essentially innocent. And so he took the polygraph. He claimed to have passed it. My mom believed him because he walked out of the state police office. So she thought, of course he passed it. Why would he have walked out? Why would, if he would have failed it, they would have arrested him. So, and that's foreshadowing for anybody who's paying attention.
Did you believe he was innocent yourself?
So I had never witnessed him hitting or hurting Jacob. And he didn't, from testimony that I gave or not testimony, but from an interview that I gave with the state police, I said that he had never hit me, but he always acted like he was going to. And when I was being interviewed, prior to my interview, because, they interview the whole family to rule out who's responsible. He grabbed me by the shoulders and he said, "Don't lie. Don't you dare lie. You know what happens to people who lie."
My goodness.
My mom continued to be with him because she believed that it was an accident. She believed him. And once they were living together and married, he became extremely abusive to her physically, to me emotionally, sexually, and essentially we lived in a horrifying environment where at 9 years old I had a kitchen knife under my pillow, a can of hairspray and a lighter, and a baseball bat under my bed in case I had to defend myself. It was terrifying. And when he was abusing me, he would tell me that if I ever said anything to anybody, that he would kill my mom and I, and nobody would ever know where we were. So eventually my mom left him. He started trying to groom my 14-year-old cousin. And this is something that, I was on a YouTube channel and very popular creator. And some of the comments were disgusting. And one in particular was related to this particular topic. The topic of grooming. So somebody had said something to the effect that my mom only left her then husband because he was hitting on my 14-year-old cousin. I just have to say, that is so wrong on every level, because first of all, that's not called hitting on somebody. That's called grooming for sexual abuse.
Right.
A 14-year-old cannot consent to sex with an adult. So it's not called sex. It's called sexual abuse or rape. Mm-hmm. And so, had my mom known that I was being abused, I firmly believe that she would have left. But I didn't say anything until we were far away from danger, because I genuinely believed that he was going to murder us. My cousin was one of those people that if you're going to ask her to not say something, you're asking the wrong person, because she has a very large, loud mouth. And she doesn't care what other people think. She's going to say whatever's on her mind. And so he told her not to say anything to anybody about him, grooming her. And she proceeded to tell everybody. So my mom left him. We filed a police report for my cousin. I then told my mom what had happened to me. I filed a police report. He was never arrested for any of that. Not to mention the multiple times that the police came out while my mom was being physically abused and obviously beat up. Never arrested. Some of that, I believe, has to do with the fact that he was friends with all of the police in the town. They played basketball together every weekend. And so when he said, "Oh, I don't know, she's just being crazy and she attacked me and I had to defend myself," they believed him. Plus, it was the early 90s at this point. It was pretty common for domestic violence to be ignored. And he has no record at all.
Where is he today? Or he's alive?
Yep, and he's still in the same town that my mom lives in.
So, well, first of all, let's just remind people how they can listen to your podcast. Let's hear all the ways to keep in touch or keep up to date on your project.
Sure. You could go to trueconsequences.com. I'm on every podcatcher that you can imagine. And if you're listening on a podcatcher and you can't find True Consequences, email me, eric@trueconsequences.com, and I'll add my feed there as well. I feel like I've done a pretty thorough job of sending it out wherever it needs to go. So at least to the more popular ones.
You on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter at TrueConsPod. I'm on Facebook at True Consequences Pod, and on Instagram at True Consequences Pod.
Let's talk about your Justice for Jacob campaign. How did that all come up?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue and struggle that we've had, my mom and I, has been the fact that the person responsible has never been prosecuted, has never been charged for Jacob's murder. And there's a lot we didn't know prior to me starting this podcast. We just knew that nothing had happened. So when my mom had been interviewed initially, they asked her if she felt like her boyfriend at the time would have been capable of harming Jacob in that way. And her response was, I don't think so. Because like I said, we didn't believe that that was possible. The DA at the time took that as her giving him an alibi, which
it doesn't make any sense, really.
That's not an alibi because nobody could have alibied him because he was the only one there with Jacob. The DA refused to bring charges because of that. He accused my mom of changing her story and of being vindictive about the divorce. And that's why she wanted to press charges. And really what had happened was that she went from not feeling that he was capable of that to completely believing that he was capable of it because of the multiple attempts on her life, as well as his other behaviors that showed that he was. There was one point in the relationship where he had wrapped a wire hanger around her neck and was choking her out, and she almost died. And had I not thrown a rock through their bedroom window, she probably would have. So once that DA was out of office, we approached the new DA, and they also refused to prosecute. And every time we brought it back up, we were basically told or treated as if we were crazy. We were trying to cause problems for this poor man that everybody loves. And the level of gaslighting that happens to victims' families is obscene. And that pain is what I was talking about before, is something that it's like being re-traumatized at a deeper level, because you start to question your own sanity. You start to question your own recollection of events. You start to question the severity of the trauma that you endured. Because if nobody else can see how horrible this was, then it must not have been that horrible. And that creates another layer of PTSD on top of everything else.
Oh my goodness.
So we went years and years, and like I said, I kind of started to see things like Victoria Martin's case, which is a horrifying case of child abuse, child sexual abuse and murder. Omar E. Varela, there's so many others that happened here that those children have not received justice, or at least what I perceive to be what would be considered justice. And so at first I didn't really want to tell Jacob's story. I didn't really want to open myself up to everybody in this way.
When you started the podcast, do you feel like in hindsight, do you feel like you were aware of the fact that it was your brother sort of behind the whole thing and that you would someday talk about it? Or did it kind of creep up on you?
It was more of a desire to honor him by helping others. I had essentially given up on any hope that there would be a possibility for justice for him because it had been so long. And I also just didn't want to open up those wounds in public. There were friends of mine that had never even heard this part of my life, because anytime I ever tried to tell people this part of my life, I was met with a very visceral reaction, which made me feel like I was traumatizing others, and I didn't want to do that, so I stopped talking about it. No fault of the people who reacted. It's a horrifying story. People are going to have reactions. Anyway, I eventually started having conversations with victims' families. And one particular conversation, I told the mother of a victim that if you ignore or stay silent about these issues, then you're basically allowing them to continue. And essentially felt like I'd punched myself in the stomach with that, and said, well, I guess I have to say something. I have to do something. And I asked my mom if she would be willing to be interviewed. And she agreed, and that was actually the first time we ever talked about the story together. It took us, I think, about 4 hours to get through it. From that, I was connected with a former prosecutor here in New Mexico, and we talked through, why the justice system is the way that it is here, and why my brother's case ended up in the situation that it was. And I requested documents from the state police from their investigation and learned a lot of things. And I learned that my mom's ex-husband had failed the polygraph. I learned that he confessed to murdering my brother. I learned a lot of details from the OMI report, and all of that was very frustrating. Isn't even the right word. It's like whatever the next level of that is, times 10 is what that feeling was, because at that point I'm like, well, how could he have gotten away with this? There are problems, major problems. We have a note that says that he confessed, but there's no record of his confession. There's no recording. There's no notes. There's no signed confession. There's nothing that indicates what he actually said or what circumstances led to that confession. A lot of evidence is missing. We don't know where it is.
Has anyone any agency ever commented on that aspect of it? Why are records missing?
Yeah, they've been asked, but there's no answer. It was a long time ago. But okay, there's a lot of things that happened a long time ago that we still have records of. So even older than 1987. So I don't know, but I started the campaign to get justice, and I've been very cautious and methodical about how I've approached this advocacy. I didn't want to just come out guns blazing and, make everyone mad right away. I wanted a slow burn, let them get mad slowly. Because I wanted to give everyone the chance, I wanted to give the DA a chance to do something, to do the right thing. But eventually, after really no movement, I decided to leverage the tens of thousands of people who've heard Jacob's story and ask them to help me by putting pressure on the DA, by calling and emailing and writing to him and asking him to reopen Jacob's case. And, I can tell you we received a response. I can't really tell you what is happening right now with the case, but I can tell you we have heard back from the DA, and I'll also tell you that we have hope. July 1st was Jacob's 35th birthday, and it's the first birthday of his that I've had hope for his case and for justice for him.
You said you tried to tell people and they reacted in a way that kind of just had, led you to sort of bury things. What would you recommend to people when interacting with victims? Was there anything they could have done differently?
Yeah. I think for me, what it would have been helpful would have been to have somebody like take my hand or put their arm around me and say, I'm here for you. And if you ever need anything, or if you ever just need to talk, or if you ever just need a hug, like I will always be here for you. Like that would have gone a long way to at least make me feel like I'm not some three-headed monster walking around on the earth, because that's exactly what it felt like, like I'm like this freak who had this horrible tragedy happen to me and nobody could possibly ever understand. And there are a lot of people who could not understand it, but to just say, I'm here for you, or would have been helpful. Yeah. I think that it's human nature to want to fix things, but some things can't be fixed. And sometimes it's enough to just be there.
I want to make sure people understand that you put out podcast episodes about a lot of things.
Yeah, I try to talk about things that I feel are important or could be beneficial to people. There are people who have no idea about domestic violence and what it's like and what it does to people. And I think it's really important for everyone to know about it, because it's my opinion that the reason we can't get our hands around this issue of domestic violence is because we don't talk about it. We don't, either we don't talk about it or people don't want to hear about it because it's too much,
Yeah.
But we can't ignore this problem away. We can't ignore child abuse away. It's not going to go away until we're able to really face it as a society. And that's going to involve a lot of things. It's going to involve legislation. It's going to involve support services, mental health services. A lot of things have to go into making this problem less of a problem. But I think the first step is in amplifying the voices of people who have lived through it and listening to them. Because a lot of people are willing to, or quick to judge people who are in intimate partner violent relationships without really understanding how you get into that situation and how difficult it is to get out.
Fantastic. And, best of luck with your nonprofit. Was there anything I didn't ask you about that you were hoping I would ask, or anything else you want to say?
Well, if anybody's into the paranormal, I have another show called Dos Pequeños, which is all about paranormal stuff in New Mexico, and it's really fun and funny. So if you're not into what I call my bummer show, True Consequences, check out my fun show, Dos Pequeños.
Eric Carter-Landin, thank you so much for being on Dakota Spotlight podcast, and best of luck to you in the future.
Thanks, James, and have a great night.
This was Eric Carter-Landin, producer of the podcast True Consequences. Check him out anywhere you get your podcasts or at trueconsequences.com. Thanks again for listening this week. I'll see you next time.